Hello everyone, welcome to the Yoga Skates podcast series. My name's Amy McCartney. Today's episode features Dr. Patrick McCartney, who completed his PhD at ANU. His paper is on malla-khamb, a preliminary sketch of the relations between Hatha yoga and the restless pole.
I will begin.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for the invitation, for organizing this lovely event, and to make some new friends and see some old ones. I'm going to talk about malla-khamb, and as the topic says, it's a bit of a sketch, mostly because this, as Professor Alter has explained in his work, on wrestling. There's not so much. It's kind of hard to find. You have to look here and there and little cracks and this. And then if you start trying to think about how to find things on malla-khamb, it's like, it gets even more opaque in terms of evidence. So what I've done is basically just kept throwing out a net and trawling it back in, and I've collected kind of anecdotes and vignettes. And so this is more or less what I will present on it. Basically, coming from an anthropological point of view, I have this kind of secondary passion project in terms of looking at malla-khamb through the contemporary thing, the claims to legitimacy and authenticity and purity and mystery, all these sort of logical fallacies that individuals use. That's more or less where I started thinking about actually the truth claims that people make around malla-khamb and its history. So if you don't know what malla-khamb is, I'll get into it, but essentially it's run through the same kind of re-orientalizing filter that yoga and Bharatanatyam and all of this has gone through. So I'll get on with it. This is what I'll do. I'll have a bit of an introduction, and I'll talk about acrobats and tumblers. We'll look at some textual stuff, and then I'll explain some of the late 19th, early 20th century Marathi texts around the kind of, this is the time that malla-khamb actually became a thing, quite distinct from the earliest kind of mentions of it. And then we'll end up at kind of my starting point a few years ago when I started thinking about this. So let's get on with it. So if you don't know, malla-khamb is basically a Marathi word, even though it's built off Sanskrit words like stamba, skamba. And it first appears, as far as I'm aware, around the end of the 18th century. But today we have these terms that are used to describe it in different ways. And I'll get into these Kundalini, Raju, and Shiva Stamba a bit later on. Someone I was talking, was it Seth, about Yogapedia? It's a really interesting website to kind of get a pulse on global yoga in some ways. So it has this definition of pole yoga, and there's a bit more to it, but that's it. I won't read it, but...
The desire to stay connected. Oh, I love it. Physically, mentally, and spiritually is a way of life in India. Uday is a former champion of a 5,000-year-old Indian gymnastics called malla-khamb.
Because it requires your mental strength as well as physical strength.
So you're working on your mind, body, and
Same
spirit.
time, simultaneously.
He started when he was 5, and now he teaches the art to 1,000 kids each week to improve their performance in school and in life. Uday, do you think someone like me could actually do malla-khamb?
Absolutely, yes, Linda, turn it around.
Now to try yoga on a rope.
Right, hands close to your body. Yeah, here. And look up, chin out and smile, yeah.
And with a smile at that.
And 3, and now.
Did I mention malla-khamb is the mother of all disciplines?
Do namaste with your hands, keeping this knee straight. Wow, and smile.
But I think I like this.
But right ear to the rope.
Then at the flag ceremony, I had a wonderful namaste moment.
Namaste.
In an upright position.
Great, namaste. It was
It's
wonderful.
my pleasure.
Can I join your team?
Well, maybe I need a little more practice.
No, don't take it out.
I love this namaste. Do you know the Zogist salute? It's from Zog, Armenian dictator. It's where the RSS get it from. It's a fascist salute, kind of similar to the one we're more familiar with. But she's learnt it, she's picked it up, and it kind of plays into the other stuff I work on in how global yogis and Hindutvavarans are kind of social worlds kind of interweave and overlap and things like that, so it's an interesting one. Anyway, we know that wrestling has a very deep antiquity back to the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt, Arcadia, Samaria. And I mean, I kind of thought, well, I mean, let's look, is there something about poles there? It doesn't really seem to be. But I mean, we have this one here, you can see the wooden clubs, the same also here. I mean, this epigraph is dated to about the 5th century, 5th, 7th century, so we know that there were apparatus that were used. So maybe poles also. We have references from the Rig Veda as well. This one I think we saw yesterday is women wrestling. So, yeah. But this from Takshila, I don't really know what it is, but I mean, it looks like there's wrestlers and there's a pole. And, there's some people kind of looking at them do something on a pole. But in this epigraphic stuff, the pole also works as a kind of punctuation mark between scenes as well. So I don't really know, but yeah. I mean, we can go all the way back to early Vedic things around Upastambas and Skambasupta. So this is from Dolavira in Gujarat. This is the Upastamba that a human or an animal is tied to as part of the ritual sacrifice. And if you don't know, it evolved into worship of the lingam and all of this, but also it evolved into it's related to a kind of more Indo-European thing of, the cosmic pillar, the axis mundi, connecting all the three worlds and stuff like that. So this is an interesting one, the anthropomorphic idea of the Upastamba. This is number 85 up there, so it's on your way out to Sarnath in the. So yeah, if you get there. Now, there's lots of textual evidence of wrestling, and in terms of competitions and the kind of ritual economy around wrestling, but there's kind of really nothing about poles, and it's being actually kind of frustrating, but also enticing. If I just keep looking here and there and. A lot of chasing of footnotes and footnotes within footnotes and this sort of thing. But this is from the Mysore Palace. This is Vijay Dashami. It is a very important day for wrestling as a kind of a thing. So the kings had, a stable of wrestlers, and that was a way to show their power and wealth. But there's different kind of classes of people who did things on poles, and as it became evident to me, it's not just a distinct thing between you've got the wrestlers of the royal court and then you've got these other kind of peripatetic performers who climb poles, but they seem to overlap also. So it gets kind of interesting. But you can see it's like Vrishtakasana and rope dancing and all of this. So there's even Parinini references wrestling. So this Sami Mushtao and all this, so it's interesting. But I found actually a lot more information in kind of Buddhist references, particularly some of the Jatakas. So we know, Psalm time, like quite early on, I'd say, we had the Chandalas erecting poles, and they climbed up them, particularly bamboo pole, and but they also did it in teams with people standing on their own shoulders and stuff. So it's an interesting thing. Rajashekara, also, I think I mentioned this yesterday, talks about how the wrestlers sat on the southern side of the royal court with the rope dancers and the jugglers and the soldiers and the magicians and other people. So we get an idea of what's going on. Now, Roshu gave me this quite curious reference that Mallakhamb, Mallastamba is also called Garuda Kamba, and so you go searching for Garuda Kamba, and what is this? Well, it keeps coming up as the Heliodorus pillar or the Kamba Baba, and I say, well, that kind of looks hard to climb, but I don't know. Someone maybe had a go at it, but I recently found some things from the Chinese monk that came to South Asia, and he describes this ancient pillar cult, which is kind of much older also, but practicing this thing at the Triveni Sangam in Prayag. So the heretics who practice asceticism have raised a high column in the middle of the river. When the sun is about to go down, they immediately climb up the pillar. And clinging onto the pillar with one hand and one foot, they wonderfully hold themselves out with one foot and one arm. And so they keep themselves stretched out in the air with their eyes fixed on the sun and their heads turning with it to the right as it sets. When the evening has darkened, they then come down. There are many dozens of ascetics who practice this rite. They hope by these means to escape from birth and death, and many continue to practice this ordeal through several decades of years. So we know that people were doing things, climbing poles for some sort of religious, soteriological purpose, and we know that they were doing it for some sort of physical practice and also as entertainment. So it's kind of interesting, these different things. So this is apparently the location in Prayag. So here's the Yamuna and the Ganga meeting in Akbar's palace, and you have this Akshaya Vaka, which is meant to be the imperishable tree. So maybe you've been there and seen it. So it refers to this thing called hook swinging or chakra puja. And there's also evidence that Santals of Bihar and other places in the Deccan and the south were involved with this performance by acrobats at various festivals.
So what's the hook mean?
Yeah, I'll show you. It literally means hooks. Yeah.
It wasn't clear from the description, wasn't it? Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So, I'm just kind of showing you that there's quite a vast array of people doing things with poles. And there's quite a few different ones as well. But two of them, it apparently has nothing to do with actually swinging, and it's meant to more symbolize the movement of the sun across, through the sky. The two ones are the Garuda and this other Toni Tukam. I'm not sure about the diacritics. This is how I found them in old gazettes. The boat swinging is one where you basically have a vehicle, like for the Jagannath Puri and all this stuff, and you would go around the temple while you're hanging off of the pole with the hooks or in a basket. So here is some photographs of it from about 150 years ago. So you can see it's kind of articulated. There's two poles and they just hang there. This is the vehicle. That's the boat one. There's this other one called Swinging a Child, which is attested back into the Vijayanagar Empire. The Dombas are basically said to be relations of the Roma in Europe today, and also coming through Iran, the Tolma. But there's this, you can see here, it's not working, this bird. What's this bird doing? So I think it's this this kabutari. So the Nats are kind of the subset of the Domas, and so either they get this name because of their acrobatic feats being similar to the roller tumbler pigeon, which if you've seen, they fly along and they just kind of go into this death roll and then fly on and death roll and kind of thing, or because of their floating manner in which they attracted male clients. So the Dolmas, even today, with kids up on poles, are still quite involved in prostitution, and it's a very marginalised community in India today, it turns out. So yeah, there's lots of interesting things about poles and people doing things with them. So this picture here is, that's meant to be one of the small poles. So in Mallkhamb there are typically 4 types of poles, which gets even more complicated. But there's a small one and generally the big one, and a rope, and then there's one that's kind of not fixed to the ground, so it makes you kind of even develop your core strength even more. But you can see, so the two main things is there's a bamboo pole and then there's a wooden pole, and it's generally teak or rosewood. So I think in terms of it kind of separating these cultures apart, these different social groups that work around poles, this is, I think, an interesting distinction to make. So we'll get into. I spent a lot of time in these like old gazetteers and stuff to find kind of the complicated way in which people, the different groups, and they overlap a lot. It's a little bit confusing, but so you had these, maybe you know, but the wrestlers were also quite good at massage and setting bones and all of this. I mean, I find this mention of being shampoo is also kind of a curious thing, but there's this idea of the mushtigas. So, and this is apparently meant to mean arms, and these were a mixed class of mendicants that were engaged in contortionism and acrobatic feats. And then you get the Daya Lakulam, and which also, so they were in the criminal castes, or the criminal group. But you can see this like really extreme backbend here, which is quite interesting. And you can see up here how the guys basically have this pole like in their underpants, which couldn't have been too comfortable. So you can see all these different types of poles. So the Dombari, rope dancers and tumblers, this idea of tumblers. So the name Kolhati is interchangeable with Dombari, and it's basically means this long pole, the bamboo pole. So here's some more photographs. So you can see here, this guy's kind of doing a bridge, and then there's someone standing on him, and then there's a kid doing it. And this guy's basically doing a handstand on the pole. So some interesting stuff going on. But you saw, you have the Manasolasa, which is basically the first mention of Mallastamba, or Stamba Shrama, as it's first mentioned as. But, there are other texts around that we can kind of find interesting mentions and kind of build some fabric together from these bare threads. So there's this idea of rope walking or dancing with daggers. So you probably can't see it, but here is one of those daggers that it looks like the one that you would wear as a kind of on your hand. Not the Vajramushti, but the kind of this one here. So. And so, Sangadeva Sangita Ratnakara also basically mentions the same sort of dance, pole dancing. And then we find these Pelwan Gopals and the Khamb Gopals. So Khamb's obviously a cognate with Kamba, I would say, and Pelwan, well, we know what that means. So you have some really interesting kind of different groups who were all wandering around doing these performances, and still to this day. But I think this is probably one of the most interesting things I came across was Yelika. So Yelika is the name of this young woman who was a Dombar in the 17th century, and she died while climbing this pole. And so somewhere in Koratagere, in Karnataka, in southeast Karnataka, there's meant to be this stone inscription, which essentially is a memorial to where she died. This footage is some archival footage from the British Museum, I think, and it shows you some old black and white silent film of a man climbing one of these bamboo poles. So you can see that it's quite different from the wrestler's pole. But you'll notice, if you've seen any of the actual kind of modern malla-khamb, that he uses identical kind of hand techniques and body positioning to maneuver himself around the pole. So it would seem that at least one argument that could be made is that this older tradition of performing on a pole has, to whatever degree we determine later, to have certainly influenced modern malla-khamb, possibly more so than the earlier malla-stamba traditions found in the Malla Purana and the Manasalasa. I don't know what's going on with this guy in his head, but he's got it on wrong, it would seem. So the Manasalasa is in the first half of the 12th century. It's also known as the Abhilashitartha Chintamani. Now, Sri Gandeka is the editor of the edition, one of the main editions, and he seems to think that it could be based on an earlier work, also because it's very similar to the Shilparatna. A little bit about the history. It said that Someshvara III was the composer of this text, and he was the son of Vikramaditya VI, who descends from the Western Chalukyans. I would think that we could maybe find something earlier if we kind of look a bit further out, perhaps. So it's something to think about. But some of the text, it basically, in the Malla Vinod is the section, it describes the different types of wrestlers, and that they should, we have the weightlifting, they should walk quickly, they should scream out loud, they should practice their battle cries and stuff like this. If you read these texts, if you've ever watched any MMA or UFC sort of thing, it's uncanny how similar this stuff is in terms of the actual protocol and how a battle is meant to start. But the wrestlers should also bathe, hopefully, in ponds with lotuses. But then there's the Stamba Shrama. So this is where it talks about basically malla-khamb. But unfortunately, it's not very clear. It just kind of lists things. But it basically says this as well, that one should unite with pole and move up and down. That's kind of pretty vague, but this will help them to be strong, and it should also be smeared with sandalwood. To basically, you have to lubricate the pole so you don't get burnt from it. You should jump and help develop the strength of the thighs. So it's meant to be this kind of all-round workout, basically. There's some interesting mentions of Kormasana. I think this is in the Roots of Yoga, but it doesn't explain what Kormasana is in terms of when the wrestlers enter the arena. But there's an interesting mention of how to. This is in the elephant section, which is a couple of chapters before the wrestling section in the Manasalasa. So I don't know if one foot raised high and the other bent it back at the knee. I don't know what that means, really. But that section of the Manasalasa describes asana for elephants in war and sport. It's kind of interesting. But there's another mention of Kormasana as well. I don't really understand what this verse is saying, but maybe we can come back to it. It's a bit unclear to me. So let's move on to the Manasalasa doesn't say a lot about malla-khamb. So we'll move on to the Malla Purana, which is said to be around the 16th century. It's kind of a Laukika Prakritized Bhasha, which is also kind of quite defective, at least the editions that have been collated. And particularly the 10th chapter, which is mentions malla-khamb or Stamba Shrama. It's only 21 verses, and again, it just kind of lists very vague things, so it's kind of frustrating. But one interesting thing in kind of more focusing on what we're all doing here is how it mentions these different types of wrestlers. So you have the Gaja, the Vrisha, the Simha, the Mriga, and also the Bhavisha, which just means like a junior wrestler. So, and these are kind of based on your phenotype, you know, if you're thick, if you're tall, if you're, you know, lanky. And so then based on that, it would then determine the level of intensity you would do in your training, and then also the types of training that you should perhaps do so you don't injure yourself or overwork. I'll come back to that. But this, I think I mentioned this yesterday, was kind of, this is from some unknown Arisan Kama Sutra text, the Mallabandha and the Viparita Mallabandha, which is supported Vrishchikasana, Mayurasana. But they call it the deer pose as well, so standing deer pose. Another one of these bare threads that I came across. In verse 20, chapter 6, verse 25 of the Mala Purana, it says that the wrestlers should do pranayama, but it doesn't mention it. I think it's Treya, I read in your stuff, that the kumbhak is the kind of preferred pranayama. Now, I don't know. It's something that's interesting. So coming back to, there's these pairings of the Gaja wrestler with Padmasana, Simha with Garudasana, Mriga with Phanasana, and the Vrisha with Kukutasana. But the Bhavisha wrestler isn't given one. It basically seems to say it's like more or less a Sukhasana or something like this. But it definitely states that they're all seated postures, but doesn't explain them. You know, this is kind of assumed knowledge, which is kind of frustrating. The Phanasana, I don't know what it is. You know, if you kind of get into it, it could be. It would seem, if you're reading it, that it's basically Vajrasana. You're sitting on your knees, and so the Phana means like the hood of the serpent. So it could be, you're maybe holding your hands up above like this, or there's also a Hasta Mudra, which is also kind of making a hood as well. I mean, it's not clear, actually. Again, kind of frustrating. But so in chapter 8, you get these 5 verses that mention asana, which I think is more or less reasonably well known. So there's a bunch of asanas up here, which, I mean, who knows what they are or aren't. I mean, they're not explained, so it's kind of frustrating. Now, coming to the exercises, so there's a list in chapter 10. There's 16 exercises, and it's a little bit kind of confusing. As you can see, I've still got quite a few question marks. It's unclear to me because in other people's texts or descriptions of these, they seem to have actually got some of them wrong, I would say. So this number 8, I mean, this Lagu Gonitaka, I mean, this is the Gonitaka stuff. It's the weight. You can see this, the guy's got it on his neck, so it's kind of like the weightlifting thing. The Upoha Shrama seems like the removal of doubt, or we can understand it like that. So it's strategizing, but other people have said it could be like something else to do with it, and exercise. So there's basically all these, either there's physical stuff to strengthen condition. Ranga Shrama is considered to be the Shreshta, the Uttama exercise. So there are 3 categories of exercises. I think I have that on my next slide. No, I took it out. So there are 3 types of exercise: Uttama, Madhya, and Adha exercises. So these all kind of get put into that. But it's still a little bit kind of unclear in some ways. I mean, the Swasa Preranika, number 4, I don't really understand. Brahmanika Shrama is, I think, clear. Stamba Shrama is obviously clear. Ranga Shrama is learning how to wrestle and grapple. But, I mean, I don't know what this, number 13, Anya Krit Kara Shrama. I mean, there is kind of references here and there in other texts that maybe it's got something to, it could be the one that you're carrying someone on your back. And back in the Manasa Lhasa, there's in the Jalashrama section, it talks about basically, you know, when you're a kid and you climb on someone else's back, and you have two other people, and there's a kind of you know, you try and topple over the other team. It would seem that that's what's being discussed. But I think in terms of trying to link it in some way to Hatha Yoga, the Kunda Karshanaka is probably the thing. But as Professor Alter was saying, you know, I mean, wrestling, yoga, these things, I mean, they might sound the same or look the same, but, you know, they could be completely parallel and discrete. So anyway, coming back to, so chapter 10 has a very brief description of how one should practice on the stamba. It says that there are 3 ways to climb the pole. And in this context, dharana means to hold. It also means the holds that you would give into your pratimala, your opponent. And it goes in, chapter 11 goes into all of these different holds and the stanikas, how you should stand, and the talas, you know, the kind of rhythm that you would move, and all of this. But yes, so verse 19 tells us that it's to develop kind of total body stuff. We also find in the Sangita Ratnakara this mention of Kodamasana. I mean, this is an interesting one, I think. So when the right foot is on the earth by the ankle outside the knee, and the left is straight when the knee and the outer side of the stretched right leg touch the ground, and the left foot is flat on the ground. It's kind of, I don't know what to think of it, but I mean, I collected all these different ideas of Kodamasana in the hope that would be interesting in some way. I also found mention in the Natana Nirnaya, and I think what kind of made me curious about this is the Kodamasana and Vrishabhasana and Garudasana are kind of are mentioned. I mean, this has got to do with dancing, but in the same way. It's. I mean, this one is, I think, quite clear. You know, it's the one we think of as Garudasana. But this is 16th century. It's kind of late.
10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know what's going on here. It's also from the Natana Nirnaya. It seems that maybe there's some linking of these asanas in some way. Oh, right. So yeah. Let's move to the 19th century. So this Viyama Jnana Kosha is 10 volumes, came out in Marathi. You can find them all on archive.org. There's an English volume that came out, I think, in 1950, but this one's from 1938 or something. And it's all about Mallkhamb. But before that, in 1922, the same guy who wrote this book, or this volume, Sapre, Marathi guy, he wrote this book called Malla-khamb, which I found a microfiche scan of it. And it's pretty poor quality. There's a lot of squinting involved. But it mentions some curious things, so Kukutasana, and it also mentions the Granth Samhita, so 231. It doesn't mention much, but it kind of gives us an idea on how this the development of Mallakhamb evolved in the 19th century, the 20th century. It lists Garudasana, Matsyasana, and what it calls Palang or Dhanushasana. So you can see, the Garuda here, and this is what it defines as Matsyasana on top of the pole. You've got Patak and the Hanuman Plaj. Now there's this curious thing, and I mean, I'm not a native Marathi speaker. I talked to Adish, who many of you know, to kind of get some confirmation about it, but there's this curious case where basically, I mean, Sapre is clearly not a Sanskritist, and he doesn't really divulge the textual sources of his appeals to authority. Maybe he didn't know them, maybe it's got something to do, he's just kind of keeping it a bit secret, who knows. But this is kind of curious. So it says that it removes, if you do the Dhanushasana on top of the pole, it will remove laziness and stimulate possibly Kundalini Shakti. But I want to explain something to you about the grammar of Marathi. So Kundali with the na marks accusative plural, right? If it were to be grammatically correct, it would be Kundalim na, as in Kundalini Shaktis, right? But Kundali also means horoscope. So is it removing laziness and stimulating horoscopes? I mean, probably not. I mean, we have Kundali as Kundalini in other texts, so it could just be that. But these are the texts that are mentioned to kind of define or locate malla-khamb within a kind of hatha yogic discourse. But there's an interesting thing about Kalpadruma, from the yoga Kalpadruma, the wish-fulfilling tree, and it's related to this Parijata yoga and this astrological text, which is mentioned only like a couple of pages over. So, I mean, maybe he is actually talking about horoscopes. I don't know. But anyway, so it's interesting how it references it in terms of being fond of war and becoming a king and pious and all of this stuff, and it gets into, there's a whole section in the back of the book that's got to do with yamas and niyamas and brahmacharya. But I'll talk about so having made a seat in an amenable location. So he's, basically he suggests that you should get some kusha grass, you should get a deer skin, you should get some rashmi to sit on, all of this stuff. And then you should, pay remembrance to your guru. Then you should concentrate your mind. You should do nazikaka drishti. You should not pay attention to the here and there. And you should focus your mind away from matters of fighting, leaving them out, and work towards creating a pure heart. And you should do pranayama. And what it recommends is basically, nadi shodhana, alternate nostril breathing. This is quite the thing. But it says, this is kind of curious, the right nostril should be closed by the right hand and thumb, and the left nostril by the ring and the little finger, but you shouldn't use the index and middle fingers. And in terms of like the Puraka ratios, so we get this, and that's from Goraksha Parita. And it says, if all this is too complicated, you could just focus on the pranavani. So let's.
Vani.
Yeah.
Plural, that's quite well.
Yeah. So this is. I'll show you some pictures from the volume. So it's interesting how it situates it as a shastra, I think. But here are some asana, so you can see Kukutasana and a bunch of asanas that we're quite familiar with. So there's this the earlier stuff. There's kind of not much asana. Even in the Malla Purana, there's only a handful of asanas. But by the time you get to the 19th century, 20th century, So here are some of the different poles that developed. So as I said earlier, there's initially 4. You had the kind of the big long one, kind of thick, maybe about 10 foot tall. And you have a shorter one, like the little stumpy. And then you can see this one up the top there. It's suspended from the ceiling, so the wobbly stuff makes you a bit stronger. But then there's these other ones that evolved as well. And there's curious things with climbing up poles and doing something with swords and guns and archery, and it's kind of interesting. But then there's also the rope one, so it's a veka here. And this is a curious thing to think about the Kundalini Raju Yoga. I mean, I would have thought that maybe they would have called it this because there's a claim that Kundalini Raju Yoga is the original one from 15,000 years ago, and all this stuff. So, but I mean, we saw that with the woman, Linda Swain. Do people not know the guy up in the left? This is Nithya Nanda from Bangalore. You may have heard of him. He was there's video of him basically getting a blowjob from a famous Tamil actress. According to rumours, he's now hiding out in Peru somewhere or something. I don't know. Anyway, so they claim that malla-khamb is 60,000 years old. Shiva taught it to Hanuman. The origin myths around it are kind of quite interesting. This guy up here, he calls himself the blissful athlete. He's Canadian, and his wife is the Kundalini yogini, and they together basically promote Shiva Stamba Yoga and Kundalini Yoga. It's all quite interesting. So they essentially claim that Kundalini Yoga or Kundalini Raju is for women, and it's meant to be Hanuman's tail. The rope is meant to be Hanuman's tail. Shiva Stamba is the phallus of Shiva. And men do Shiva Stamba and women do Kundalini, according to them. And they claim that all of this is found in the Agamas. And then if you kind of, dig a bit deeper, they seem to assert that it's in the Kirana Agama. There are in the sections which I think that they're referring to. I mean, I've tried to ask them, and they don't ever respond. There's sections on, festivals and erecting poles and all the stuff around the stupa and mandapa and that. But I mean, it's got nothing to do with actually climbing the poles or, this sort of stuff. So, So in these scripts, there was hidden an ancient practice referred to as malla-khamb. I can't find malla-khamb. Malla-khamb didn't exist until, as you know, the late 18th century. But they say it's thousands of years old, and it's the most authentic and pure, based on Shashtanga yoga. They also have got a world record, Guinness Book World Record for this rope yoga thing. So they say develop your yogic body with revived practices Shiva Stamba Yoga, Kundalini Raju Yoga. So they say that women were only allowed to do this Kundalini Raju Yoga, but we have this Deshika Ragini image which clearly shows women on the pole. So, I mean, that's a curious thing. So we'll end with this. That's the Hanuman watch. So you can see, I mean, it's from basically saying there are 3 ways to climb up and down a pole to condition yourself as a wrestler. That it's evolved quite considerably. And so Mallkhamb, India, there's now World Championships for Mallkhamb. They're trying to get it in the Olympics, along with Kabaddi and things like that. So it's all part of the branding of the nation. Bit of cultural nostalgia, connecting to some imagined glorious age. So yeah, there are different ways to think about poles and to think about physical culture around them. And as I said, I mean, it's kind of a sketch in some ways. So I hope you got something out of it anyway. So.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. In the meantime, have a look at the Yogascapes page at yogascapesinjapan.com for more episodes. Until next time.